There is a place on Earth where millions of people live downstream from its rivers, yet very few people live on the land itself. A place so high that the air contains far less oxygen than at sea level. So vast that you can travel across enormous stretches without seeing a major city. And yet, this seemingly empty landscape holds clues to one of the biggest mysteries in human history. Because deep inside a cave here, scientists discovered the remains of an ancient human relative that lived roughly 160,000 years ago. So why did humans come here in the first place? How did they survive at such extreme altitude? And if people were able to live here tens of thousands of years ago, why is this enormous region still so sparsely populated today? The answer begins with one of the most extraordinary landscapes on Earth. To understand this mystery, we first need to understand the land itself. The Tibetan Plateau stretches across a huge part of Central Asia and sits at an average elevation of around 4,500 meters above sea level. It is surrounded by some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, including the Himalayas. But its real challenge isn't just the height. At this altitude, the air is much thinner, temperatures can drop sharply, and many areas have short growing seasons. Farming on a large scale is difficult, and moving across the rugged landscape has always been challenging. Yet people did not simply avoid this place. They found ways to survive here. And the deeper scientists look into its past, the more surprising that story becomes. For a long time, scientists thought humans could not have lived at extreme altitudes until relatively recently. Then evidence from a cave in the Tibetan Plateau began to change that idea. At Baishiya Karst Cave, researchers discovered an ancient human jaw known as the Baishiya mandible. Scientific analysis identified it as belonging to a Denisovan, an ancient human group known mostly through limited fossil and genetic evidence. The remarkable part is its age. The jaw is estimated to be more than 160,000 years old. But this discovery raises an even bigger question. How could an ancient human survive in an environment where oxygen was already scarce? The answer may be connected to a remarkable genetic story that links ancient Denisovans with people living on the plateau today. The answer may be hidden in our genes. People living on the Tibetan Plateau today have remarkable adaptations that help their bodies function in low oxygen conditions. One of the most important is linked to a gene called EPAS1, which plays a role in how the body responds to oxygen. Scientists discovered that a version of this genetic adaptation is closely related to Denisovan DNA. This suggests that ancient Denisovan populations may have contributed genetic traits that later helped people survive at high altitude. But genetics is only part of the story. Thousands of years after those ancient humans disappeared, new communities learned to survive across the same harsh landscape. They developed ways of living around the cold, limited farmland, and difficult terrain. And eventually, this seemingly empty plateau became home to powerful cultures and one of the most important empires in medieval Asia. Long before the Tibetan Empire became a major power, different cultures had already developed across the plateau. One of the most mysterious was Zhang, a powerful polity associated with Western Tibet. Much of its early history remains uncertain, but archaeological evidence and later Tibetan traditions suggest that the region was far from empty. Then, during the 7th century, the Tibetan Empire began to rise. Under powerful rulers such as Songtsen Gampo, Tibet expanded beyond the plateau and became a major political and military power in Asia. Its armies fought neighboring kingdoms, while its rulers competed for control of important routes across Central Asia. For a place that looks almost empty on a modern map, this is a remarkable transformation. But the plateau's importance wasn't only about armies and empires. People had been crossing these mountains for centuries, carrying goods, beliefs, languages, and ideas between different parts of Asia. And those ancient routes reveal another reason this seemingly empty land mattered so much. Crossing the Tibetan Plateau was never easy. Travelers had to deal with extreme altitude, freezing temperatures, powerful winds, and enormous distances between settlements. Yet people continued to cross these highlands because the plateau connected important regions of Asia. Merchants moved goods through mountain passes, while pilgrims and travelers carried religious ideas and cultural traditions across the region. These routes were not always one organized road. They were networks of paths that changed with geography, seasons, and political control. And this movement mattered. The same mountains that made life difficult also connected the civilizations surrounding the plateau. But there was something even more important flowing from these mountains. Water. And once we follow that water, the story of the Tibetan Plateau becomes much bigger than the people who live there. The Tibetan Plateau is often called the Water Tower of Asia, and there is a good reason for that. Its glaciers, lakes, snowfields, and wetlands feed the headwaters of some of Asia's major rivers, including the Yangtze, Yellow River, Mekong, Indus, and Brahmaputra. These rivers then flow toward some of the most populated regions on Earth. So here is the strange contradiction. The plateau itself has relatively few people, yet the water originating from this highland region is important to enormous populations far beyond its borders. This makes the plateau one of the most geographically important places in Asia. But it still leaves us with the original question. If this land is so important, why didn't huge cities and massive populations develop here? The answer lies in the same environment that makes the plateau so valuable. The biggest reason is altitude. At around 4,500 meters above sea level, the human body has to work harder in an environment with much less available oxygen. For people without long-term adaptation, even simple physical activity can become difficult. Then comes the climate. Large parts of the plateau are cold, dry, and exposed to strong winds. The growing season is short, and much of the land is unsuitable for intensive agriculture. The terrain creates another problem. Mountains, valleys, and enormous distances make transportation and large-scale development difficult. But that doesn't mean people couldn't live here. They adapted. Pastoral communities learned to depend on animals such as yaks, which could survive conditions that made conventional farming difficult. So the plateau didn't remain empty because humans were unable to survive there. It remained sparsely populated because the environment placed a natural limit on how many people it could support. But perhaps the most surprising thing about the Tibetan Plateau is that its story is still being uncovered. Archaeologists continue to study caves, ancient settlements, tools, animal remains, and traces of human activity across this enormous landscape. Each discovery helps answer a bigger question. How did humans repeatedly adapt to one of the most extreme environments on Earth? The ancient Denisovan jaw showed that humans were reaching high altitudes far earlier than scientists once believed. Later cultures and empires proved that people could build complex societies here. And modern Tibetan communities demonstrate just how successfully humans can adapt to life at extreme elevation. From a satellite, the plateau may look almost empty. But beneath those mountains and grasslands is a history stretching back tens of thousands of years. And there may still be discoveries waiting beneath the surface. The Tibetan Plateau may look empty, but its history tells a very different story. For thousands of years, people have crossed its mountains, raised animals on its grasslands, built communities, followed ancient routes, and adapted to an environment that seems almost impossible to live in. The archaeological discoveries are especially important because they show that human survival here was not a recent achievement. From the Denisovan remains found in an ancient cave to the cultures and empires that later developed across the plateau, each discovery adds another piece to the story. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson of this place. A landscape does not have to be crowded with cities to be important. Sometimes the most remote places on Earth are the ones that preserve the deepest traces of human history. So why does this enormous part of the world have so few people? The answer isn't that humans could never survive here. They did. The Tibetan Plateau is sparsely populated because extreme altitude, low oxygen, harsh weather, limited farmland, rugged terrain, and enormous distances make large-scale settlement difficult. But its empty appearance can be misleading. Beneath those mountains are traces of ancient humans. Across its valleys are the remains of cultures and empires, and from its highlands flow rivers that support populations far beyond the plateau itself. For thousands of years, humans have found ways to survive where nature made life incredibly difficult. And that may be what makes the Tibetan Plateau so remarkable. It isn't an empty part of the world. It's a place where human history survived against the odds,